Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Today's ink, and again the rest of the week, is going to be ink re-reviews. So, inks I've tested before, and for one reason or another are in need of an update. So, today's Private Reserve Lake Placid Blue. It's a very simple, standard blue, and we'll get into it. As you might be able to tell, since it's Private Reserve, it used to be in this bottle, which I think is a 50 milliliter. Now I use it for containing rogue reporters in their animagus form. This is all I have left. What's in here, I think that's about 12 milliliters, something like that. It's not much, but yeah, it takes a while to go through that much ink. Now the two pens I used were these. This is a Kaweco Ice Sport, which now has a moss gray in it, but has a double broad nib. And weirdly, it was flowing differently between these two pens, and it was flowing like a 7 out of 10 wetness in this, and that's compared to how this pen normally goes. And then I think it was something like, yeah, it felt like a 5 out of 10 in this, and this is in Ohto Tasché. And although it's a Japanese-made pen, it has more of a Western fine sort of size to it, moderate Western fine. Now let's check out some comparisons. Here is Private Reserve Lake Placid Blue, and here is Noodler's Bernanke Blue. Now, I think this has just a little bit of a wink more towards periwinkle. This one has just a little bit more yellow. Also, this is a fast dry ink. Here we have Sailor's Gentle Satin or Sky Blue. Again, I think this maybe just has a little bit more yellow in it, and this has just a little bit more purple. This is Diamine's Royal Blue, which I think is just a little bit lighter. And lastly, Ackerman number 3, Ackerman Blau, which again I think is maybe just slightly more towards the straight blue, and this one just has a little breath more towards purple. But it's so gentle that like a lot of the standard blues that sort of lean towards periwinkle didn't really match, so out of about 680, these were the 4 closest. So bear with me. Chromatography. Now, this one on the right, yes, with the little D in the corner, that's the one that I let dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it. You're generally supposed to put the line of ink down and then instantly dunk it in the water, which is what I did with this. And as you can see, there's a lot of blank space right there. It is almost impossible, either on screen or in real life, to tell where that initial line was. It is just a lot of blank space. But then interestingly, we get this sort of like lighter, almost more of like a Prince purple, and then we get into more of a deep sort of almost like a royal blue, and then there's this very thin band of almost black right at the edge. Now, this one I let dry. So I did the line of ink, pretty much instantly dunked this in the water, and then when this test was dry, which took about maybe 8 to 10 minutes, I then dunked this one. Now, it is faint, and especially on camera, but I think you can see there's this light blue right here where the initial line was. So you can see where it started. And also you can very distinctly tell just how blank this is as compared to this. There is some resistance. Also, we get much less of that distinct separation, if you will, of purple and then blue. Here, it's more of a soft, I don't know, like a lavender, almost like just barely sort of purpley blue, and then it's very standard blue up at the top, and again there's a much finer line of dark right up at the top. This one it's a little more noticeable. Chemical tests. So here are the 4 standard ones that I generally do. Now, as you can see, water broke it up pretty well. It was washing away pretty easily. What remains was, like if you follow the pattern of the smear, what was laid on pretty heavily. So, yep. Now, bleach, I think this is fascinating, and I hope the camera picks this up. This right here is almost like a neon turquoise. The stuff that's like barely remaining. But yeah, for the most part, it obliterated it like it was never there. So not super bleach resistant. Curiously, I thought this pen flush, you can retain more of the pattern. Because like here you can see this line would have been put on much more thin, and then this would have been much heavier. So I feel like more remained on the paper than with water. But anyways, as you can tell, they all turned slightly purple. And hydrogen peroxide got it moving, but it was like it was trying to dissolve it, and in the process it also kind of started to dissolve the paper, so it got all woolly and funky. And as always, I never recommend that you try and clean out your pen with hydrogen peroxide. This is just a resistance test, something I do for fun, and hydrogen peroxide happened to be something we had in the house. Paper test. Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Yep. Now this is a very simple standard blue. I actually prefer it to Waterman's Serenity or Florida Blue. It has more saturation to it, something that Private Reserve is known for. But it is a fairly basic, simple blue. Now I do love Private Reserve American Blue, but that one has some oomph to it. And that one's like a slightly more toned down electric DC blue, which has just ridiculous sheen. This one is a little more calm, but it's still rich. It still is very well saturated. Here you can see, even in the heaviest parts, it is very difficult to see those lines. In fact, you can barely see them at all. But, as I was saying before, this Ohto Tasché in fine, it wasn't flowing super readily, whereas in the double broad Kaweco, it was really going, as you can see. Yeah, so that sort of Western fine in the Ohto Tasché took 13 seconds to dry on this extremely dense paper, and the double broad took 30. You can see that smear. It was really, really laying it down. And there's just this micro halo of sheen, like it is a razor thin line around those darkest parts, and it's in the writing too, especially with the double broad. But you get that really distinct halo effect, which is nice. And where it's being put on not quite so heavily, you do get a lot of shading, like you see in that Western fine. Now, I did say that in the thinner areas it takes on almost a dusty quality, like a matte finish, if you will. So if you're into that, it's well saturated, it's got a texture, it's a distinctly blue that's not snooze-worthy and yet not overly excitable. So there's that. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. I say there's no sheen, but it is like a razor. It is so fine. It's actually hard to see in person, but occasionally, I know I'm not going to get it on camera, but anyways. Water test. Some of the double broad remains, but it is very light, and parts of it are pretty much all gone. That fine is totally gone. What I think is interesting is that it didn't dye the page, which kind of reminds me of that chromatography test. You could barely tell anything was there. But yeah, the stuff that was put down with the double broad, you can tell which lines, which dots. A little bit remain, but I think that's just because the more you put down, the more remains. Next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. This stuff is my favorite. Now, here, even though these lines are sort of a dark gray, almost a black, and these are sort of a soft purple, these lines almost fade much more easily into the background, and they're a lot less noticeable, or a lot easier to not see. Or actually, the camera's really picking it up. I don't know why, but in person, like, you can barely see them. Maybe I'm going... What's the reverse of colorblind? You can't see gray. I don't know. Maybe. Here's where I start talking about how weird the flow is acting in these two different pens. I don't know why. I know they both have plastic feeds, and they both have fairly small feeds. One of their feeds has gills, and I think the other one doesn't. But I don't think that has anything to do with it. I just think, I don't know, something funky's going on. But, yeah, so... Still, we've got very nice shading, like a distinct, noticeable shading in that Western fine in the Ohto Tasché. And we have a rich, bold coloring in the wet double broad with, again, like if you look at the X embossing, you can see that dark halo outline around the writing. You see it in the Z in Wizards. Anyways, Q and Quick, which I generally like. I think it increases contrast between the light background of the paper. Camera, calm down. The light background of the paper and the writing. Now, the fine took 13 seconds to dry. The double broad took 30. Quite a smear. But, yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. There's no sheen on here. But I guess we'll have to learn to live without. Now, once again, this water test is rather fascinating. It didn't dye the page again, but a little bit more of that fine is left. Not a ton, but a little. There's still some of the double broad left in parts. So, not a ton of water resistance, but it's not completely gone always all the time. Now, next up is Rhodia. It's an 80 gram per square meter paper. Now this stuff does have a ceramic coating added in the pressing process, but this paper has aged badly. And I keep trying to replace my paper. I've had especially difficult problems finding Clairefontaine that hasn't aged badly, because a lot of times shops will take it out of the plastic packaging it comes in, and then it sits on the shelf for who knows how long. It gets oxygenated, but anyways, so this paper may not be the ideal account, which is unfortunate because this is me retesting it. But we do have some very distinct shading that we see in that Western Fine Ohto Tasché. And again, we have a very distinct dark outline in the double broad. Now that fine took 13 seconds to dry. The double broad took 29. And I actually used the double broad for writing the rest of it, because here I did think that this looks especially dusty. It has that dusty quality, that sort of half-faded photo kind of a thing. Now that is a fun texture. A lot of people really like it. I like it sometimes with certain colors. This wasn't super jiving for me that day, but I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with it. I love inks that can convey a texture. But yeah, as I say here, there's no feather, spread, or sheen. There is some echo, and there is a little bit of bleed, or I should say very near bleed. We get very near bleed here, which is where I went over this with a very wet writing double broad a couple times to correct a letter. So I almost feel like I should say it's a combination of nature and user that sort of screwed that up. But yeah, so I just wanted to take credit for that. As you can see, the rest, it's fine, but still, I know for a fact that this is, if it would sheen, it should sheen on here. And since we got a little with the Clairefontaine, and spoiler alert, we're going to see some with the Tomoe River, it probably should here too, especially with how wet it was being laid on, so I gotta say on my bad. Now, water test, it didn't dye the page. Which is great, because, you know, like when there's a spill, and especially with a really saturated ink like this, a lot of times when you mop it up, it just leaves this big, like, vague cloud of color. So that's nice that it, you know, when you picked it up, you took the ink with it. So that's, I guess that's assuming you mopped it up when the water or whatever spilled on it was still wet. I imagine if it's sunk in, it's kind of a little too late. But once again, that fine camera, what are you doing? We're on the clock here. Anyways, that fine is pretty much gone. You can barely see at all what remains. The double broad, we get half an E and maybe 75% of an S. And I'm going to say 80% of a W. But yeah, the rest, it's there. It's very light comparatively. There is something, so if you had to recover it, you'd have a square one if you wrote in a double broad. Now, Tomoe River. Now this is a cream colored paper. I'd say the Clairefontaine and the Rhodia are more of a white, and the Fabriano is more of an ivory. But I intentionally choose different colors of paper because I want you to see the way that an ink can change given the background. Now, here, I think this does take on a bit more of that periwinkle that we see in things like Diamine Sapphire Blue, and Kaweco's Royal Blue, and Waterman's Serenity. Just gets a little bit more purple. Here, it's much more distinctly blue. Here, it really starts to take on a bit more of a purpley color. And here, because of the way this paper works, it tends to not bleed or feather or spread. It really brings out sheen, but it also really brings out echo. It extends dry times, because essentially nothing can penetrate the paper, practically, because of dark sorcery. But things stack up on top, so you kind of have to wait out for the moisture in the ink to evaporate, and everything sits on top, and where it lays on heaviest, that's where you get sheen. Camera. There we go. And it's in the writing as well, it's most distinctive there. And admittedly, I laid it on stupid thick to try and get that. But we do have like micro halo sheen around the wettest parts. I just have a feeling I'm not going to get it on camera. Well, you can kind of see it. But anyways, yeah, since where it's thin, like where it's laid on thin, it's laid on really thin. Where it's laid on heavy, it's really laid on heavy. So here, it looks quite light in the fine. And that dark halo around the wettest parts is super distinct, which again, I like. But like I said, it really draws out dry time. So that fine took 20 seconds to dry. The double broad took 42, and look at that smear. Holy moly. Now yeah, there is no bleed, there is no feather, there is no spread. There is some echo. I mean, this is 52 gram paper. This is practically half the width of Clairefontaine. And we had a very wet writing European double broad. Yeah, where I laid it on, as I said, stupid thick to ensure I'd get sheen for camera. Yeah, we're gonna get some show through. So if you're super sensitive to it, maybe stick to something like the fine, which was dry writing. So that, unless you're super picky, that really won't bother you. This is if you're an idiot like me. But you can see a bit of it. But again, European double broad, wet writing. Not the lightest ink anyway. I mean, this ink is well saturated. It's a private reserve. But yeah. Now this paper loves to let ink just slide away when you add more water, because like I said, it's just dried on top. So when you add more water, it's like you're rehydrating the ink. But, once again, it really didn't dye the page. And that fine is really, really gone. Like, really, really gone. With the double broad, there is a little bit of something, which I think honestly just is a testament to how much ink this pen was laying down. Because holy moly. Now the next three papers, I only use the Ohto Tasché except to write the name. And this is some just god-awful 20-pound paper. This stuff is just terrible. Now, I'm just going to show you a little comparison. Now here is the Tomoe River, where there is no spread. And here it is on the 20-pound. We get a much broader expansion of the line width. We lose, I'd say, like 90% of the shading in the writing, and the kind that we do have is not good. If you look at the bottom of the Z in lazy, or the H in the, that's where we start to get this woolliness that's bleeding over to what is essentially some feathering. And now it's not big spiky feathers, but it's like weird bumpy feathers. Oh, okay, so the double broad I used to write the name, there we are getting good old-fashioned feathering. But yeah, so we have spread, we have woolliness, we have some feathering. We're losing a lot of the shading. And here I feel like the ink lightened, almost like it had been unsaturated a bit. But again, I mean, this is the Ohto Tasché and Fine, the one that was dry writing, and that was writing much more thin and dusty, so yeah. But anyways, 2 seconds to dry. Still a very standard blue color. This would be a very good, like, school blue. Yeah, we get some show through. And we get dots of bleed. Like, you can see a lot of that very clearly from the other side. But then when we bring it in close, there are a lot of little dots where it starts to get pretty dark and very nearly makes it to the other side. In fact, I'd say in some places it made it to the other side, it just didn't make it through the other side. Yeah, not ideal. The paper totally freaked out. One of these days I'm going to figure out a way to convey to you just how much the paper can reshape itself with water, because this is one of those times. Like, if you can see, this page is trying to go like that. That's being guided by the buckling that happened here at the water test. So if you see this line right here, see how the shadow kind of changes? That is completely buckled up. So that's fascinating. Anyways, now more absorbent papers like these tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. Kind of did, kind of didn't. It feathered, it exploded. A lot of it washed away. It didn't turn into one solid bleh of color, which was kind of fascinating. But still, it's really gone. You'd be hard-pressed to recover that. Now next up is Mead Notebook Paper, which anyone who went to school in the United States is probably familiar with. This is from a spiral notebook. This kind of paper is fairly prone to feathering, the kind that you'd get in a lab notebook. That's like newspaper, that's prone to all the bad things. But yeah, here, as you might be able to tell, as compared to the 20-pound, we don't get quite as much spread. So compare between all three. It's sort of a happy medium. We still lose, actually here I'd say more like 95% of the shading, but we don't get as much feathering. I'd say it's still kind of woolly, but I mean, we don't really get feathering. There might be the odd bit of it. But I mean, even that double broad, like at the bottom of the L in Lake. Yeah. Now it took 4.5 seconds to dry. Camera. 4.5 seconds to dry. Still a very standard looking blue. We do have spots of show through. Now bear in mind this paper is physically thinner than 20-pound, and that's a double broad, running very wet, so let's be reasonable. Now here you can see that's very light and very opaque. Even here in the scrubby, it doesn't get super dark, which means it has sunk into the paper a good bit, but it's not quite touching the back, or certainly not coming out the back. Now there are spots, little spots throughout, where it does start to get dark. So if you were using a wetter writing fine, Western fine, yeah, so really threading the needle here. But this paper will absolutely freak out when you add water. Here, it's not an ideal result, but all things considered, it's really not bad, especially when you consider previous results for this ink. But yeah, there's a bit left, not a ton. Some of it did feather, explode, and freak out. It would not be the easiest thing in the world to cover, but again, it didn't completely just dye this section a swath of vaguely blue with like kelp plant explosions, so yeah, that actually turned out a lot better than I thought it would. Now lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, and man, I hate this stuff. This paper is just terrible. Yeah, it's the only word for it, but I didn't know better once, so I'm keeping it to educate others, because holy crap. Holy crap, people. Look at this. This is a 5 out of 10 writing Western fine. So very moderate. Look at this double broad. That exploded. That's a disaster. And look, here in the scrubby, we can actually see the pattern of pulp that they mushed into paper. You should not be able to see that. Now it took 6 seconds to dry. We've got feathering, we've got bleed, we've got woolliness. Yeah, we got bleed. You see how dark and distinct these spots are? That means that they made it to the other side and they dotted the page below. So that has not only ruined the front because it looks so terrible, it's ruined the back because it's come through, and it might even have started to ruin the next page. That's just awful. But here's something that's interesting. So here we're looking at the back of the water test. You can start to see some of that purple, that like Prince purple we saw, being pushed out the back. So that's weird. And again, this feathered and exploded. It started to overlap. This looks like something out of Cookie Monster's Nightmare. Or Grover? I don't know. But yeah, that's really gone. It's feathering, exploding, it's washing away. It's just bad. I hate that paper. Anyway, so there you go. For your consideration from the Triple N Network. Private Reserve's Lake Placid Blue. Now I know a couple of places are cutting back or straight up stopping their selling of Private Reserve inks. I'm actually really disappointed in that, because this was one of the brands of ink that I was introduced to after I'd gotten through the ones that used to just be given to me. Jerbon, which I find to be criminally undersaturated. Mont Blanc, which, if you're like me and you like the more economical stuff, yeah. So Private Reserve, I actually really like these bottles with their big openings. You know, you can fit any pen in there. Even those ones that look like they're made out of a carrot, yeah, you can probably fit that in there. They come in decent sizes. The price per milliliter is great, and they don't skimp. I mean, this is a brand of ink that is known for really putting the ink in there. So I'm really actually kind of sad that a lot of places are cutting back, because I think as a brand, it's been really good for me. Is it perfect? No. Do I think sometimes their naming doesn't make a lot of sense? Yes, but I think that's almost like part of the weird charm of it, you know, and you get like, I don't know, ebony blue and it's actually teal, you know, but whatever. Yeah, it's, I mean, because it's really saturated, usually you have to clean it out a bit more. This is not one of those super extreme inks. It is well saturated. And I think it's much more well saturated than a lot of these standard blues of a lot of other companies. So if you're looking for one of those standard blues but you want to increase the likeliness of sheen, I would recommend this. I don't know why I wasn't getting a lot of it here. Is it super water resistant? No. But neither is, you know, Diamond Sapphire, or at all Waterman Serenity Blue, or a lot of those, you know. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I've gone through like 45 milliliters or whatever it is of this stuff. So, yeah, Lake Placid Blue, I probably had it for about a decade. It's really not bad. So, anyways, there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you like the review, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.